David Jones. I represent the West Highcliffe ward. I'm the committee's chairman, and on my immediate right is Councillor Colin Jameson, who is the committee's vice chairman. Now, I know the other members and officers have their names in front of them, but as the camera sometimes doesn't pick them up, and as sometimes people from the back can't actually see them very clearly, I'll ask members and officers present to introduce themselves, starting with Councillor Hallam.
Hello, good evening. I'm Councillor Hallam, Highcliffe Ward. Thank you. Councillor Grace, Town Centre Ward.
Councillor Geary, North Highcliffe Ward.
Councillor Neil, Jumpers Ward. I apologise for my voice tonight.
Kim Bowditch, Senior Planning Officer.
David Hodges, Team Leader for Development Management.
I'm Dan Lucas, a barrister non-practicing in the legal team.
Colin Jameson, Vice Chairman of the committee and a member for Burton and Wington.
Peter Hall,
Daniel Renner, Fire Democratic Services.
Peter Hall, Town Centre Councillor.
Denise Jones, Grange Ward.
Janet Abbott, Grange Ward.
I'll take a few moments to explain the procedure that we'll be following tonight. All members have had comprehensive planning reports sent to them well in advance of this meeting on the two issues that are before us. Each application will be presented by the appropriate case officer. After each presentation, those members of the public who have written to the council requesting to speak will be invited to take the seat at the opposite end of the table to me. There is a time allocation of 3 minutes for each speaker, and in the interest of fairness, these limits will be strictly timed and enforced. You can see the gadget with the 3 lights on. I'll give people a few moments to introduce themselves. The green light will come on and then you have your 3 minutes. When you've got 30 seconds left, the yellow light will come on, and then when your time is up, the red light will come on and I will have to ask you then to stop. Speeches must relate to material planning issues and must not be derogatory. No questioning is allowed, and no further written information, photographs, plans or other material can be submitted at this stage. I hope this is clear, but if there are any questions, the officers, the Vice Chairman or myself will be very pleased to answer them after the meeting. If the meeting extends beyond 9 p.m, which I very much hope is not the case tonight, I shall ask for a proposal from the members to extend the meeting to a specific time, and once the item under discussion at that time is resolved, the meeting will then be adjourned and will reconvene on another evening. In order to assist in the process this evening, I must ask everyone to ensure that mobile phones are either switched off or, because we do accept that some people have to be contactable, are switched to silent ring. We would be grateful if you would remain quiet whilst the meeting is in progress. I'd like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be filmed by the Council and broadcast live on the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. If you are seated in the chamber, it is possible that the cameras will capture your image. By your presence, you are deemed to consent to being filmed and to the use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and or training purposes. As the chairman of the meeting, I can, at my discretion, terminate or suspend filming if, in my opinion, continuing to do so would prejudice the proceedings of the meeting, or if I consider that continued filming might infringe the rights of any individual or breach any statutory provision. Now, a couple of housekeeping items. There are no fire practices scheduled tonight, so if the alarm does sound, I have to ask you to vacate the building as quickly as possible, either through the double doors there and then round to the entrance on the outside of the building, or through the doors there into the foyer and then through the doors by which you entered. I know a lot of people say, oh, this is just routine, but in the last County Planning Committee meeting, we just about got to the end of the agenda and the fire alarm sounded, so we had to vacate the building. So it can happen. If you need the facilities, they are through the door there. Gentlemen to the immediate left and ladies to the end of to the next corridor and down the end there. I will take this opportunity to thank those members of the public who have come to speak to us tonight. We do appreciate your contributions. You are those most affected, and we are very pleased to take the points you make into consideration. So thank you very much for that, and we'll now move into the actual agenda, which is apologies for absence. Are there any apologies for absence?
Yes, Chairman. Apologies from Councillor Davis.
Apologies from Councillor Davis. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest or any other matter that members wish to be brought to our attention? Councillor Neal.
Item 4B, one of the speakers tonight, I know because of he owns a cafe in Christchurch. I opened it when he had a refit as the mayor, but it was a mayoral duty. There's no pecuniary real interest, but just in case anyone feels that there was an issue.
So that is basically a declaration for transparency. Are there any further declarations? So no further declarations. Minutes of the last meeting, and I know Councillor Hall has a query. Councillor Hall.
Mr. Chairman, I'm very disappointed that at the last meeting, my non-material amendment 818-2018 was deferred for this meeting, and for some unreasonable way, it isn't on there. So I'd like to know why it's not on there and why it wasn't done as the committee agreed. And I think at the end of the meeting, Chairman, you said that would be on the agenda, and that hasn't happened. So it's not good enough. And I think really the whole application, if I wasn't a councillor, it would have gone sailing through months ago. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Hall. I have raised the matter with the officers, and I have watched the video of the last meeting. I am able to confirm that at the start of the meeting, when you raised the matter and it was asked for deferral, Mrs. King did say that it was normally a matter for your agent to raise this and ask for a deferral from the officers. She did not believe that we had said we had asked for any specific date for it to come back. On the video, there is no date. It is simply deferred. Now, my own recollection is that I can remember this being raised at the very end of the meeting. I cannot remember, and I could not state on oath, that I did say it would come back to the next meeting. I again watched the video, and unfortunately it terminates just at the end of, or the sound vanishes just at the end of the meeting. So I think this matter must be up to the members to judge the correctness of this, but I wonder if the officers would like to come in on this.
Thank you, Chairman. Just for clarification, after the application was deferred last month, we did seek confirmation from your agent as to what the instructions are for the local authority, for the committee. We're still waiting for a response from your agent, councillor, as to how you want the application determined. Do you want it determined as it was submitted, or are you intending to change the plan? So we're waiting for a response from your agent.
I'm going to interrupt that point now, because that would normally be the discussion would take place between the planning officers and an applicant who, if he were not a councillor, would not be discussed at that point, would not be discussed in this meeting. What has been raised, and I must will have to put this to the members, is that there is an error of fact in the minutes that at the end of the meeting it was stated that the application would come back to the November meeting. Now, the way forward, and my legal friend here is, I'm sure, going to correct me if I get this wrong. The only way forward at this point is for you to move an amendment to the minutes. Well, first of all, let's do it this way. As the committee clerk, is your recollection and your manuscript notes that there was a request, a timed deferral, i.e. was it deferred sine die or was it deferred for 1 month? Do your notes give an indication of this?
Chairman, I don't have any indication of a date. What we do have is a separate audio recording to that one that is shown on YouTube. And if you'd like to defer the minutes, we can check them.
Chairman, I think that'd be brilliant, because I think it is important to get these facts absolutely crystal clear.
Thank you. Vice Chairman?
Thank you, Chairman. Notwithstanding the discussion that's just gone on, if the council officers are waiting for instruction from the agent, then I don't believe that we can continue until such times as we have that instruction. So perhaps we can clarify that point as well.
Well,
Mr. Chairman, if I could come back, because it is important.
Councillor Hall, thank you. We have 2 issues.
No, we've got 1 issue, Mr. Chairman.
Through you, through me, I'm the chairman. Unfortunately, as chairman, we have 2 issues. One is the question of the instructions from your side as applicant to the officers, which would be the same as for any member of the public. The second issue is an error of fact in the minutes. Now, we have evidence now that there is an actual, and I do agree with you, the minutes have to be factually accurate. So it would be, I think, permissible, and again I bow to my legal friend's guidance, for us to approve the minutes with the exception of that possible addendum and bring that back to the next meeting. Is that in order?
It seems a reasonable way forward, Chairman. I don't see an issue with that. Otherwise, we're just going to be at a stalemate, and you've got the waiting public here, waiting to hear the applications. So I think that's probably the prudent way forward. You may want to take a vote on that, Chair.
Thank you. Do I see a proposal that the minutes be approved with the exception of the query from Councillor Hall, which will await confirmation from the further confirmation from the officers? Councillor Neal, is that seconded? Councillor Abbott, is there any objection? And we'll move straight to the vote. All those in favour that the minutes be approved with that exception? Anybody against? Thank you very much. And is it your wish then that I sign these minutes with that exception as a true and correct record of proceedings?
Yes.
Thank you very much. So we now move on to item 4, and the sharp-eyed amongst the public will have realised that we have a small discrepancy in the agenda, in that we move to we're moving to, let me just check that it's, that the report on page 9 is agenda item 5A, whereas agenda item 5 doesn't exist. So we'd obviously, a gremlin crept into the system, and the 2 reports are agenda item 4A and 4B respectively, 4A is 55 Hillside Drive. 4B, as it states on page 3 of the agenda, is 42 The High Street. So the heading of the reports on page 9 and the next one are in error. So apologies for that. Gremlins do creep into the system. So if we are talking about now the application for 55 Hillside Drive, and who was the lucky one with this? Mrs. Bowditch. Councillor Bowditch.
Okay, 55 Hillside Drive. I have one housekeeping note, and that is we've received an additional letter of objection, but that doesn't raise any comments that haven't already been noted in the agenda. In other words, it repeats other comments previously made. So, the application before you seeks variation of condition 2 and 4 of planning application 8170181, approved last year, allowing the original application sought consent for alterations and extensions to the roof of a detached bungalow, chalet bungalow, in Hillside Drive to form an annex. Property in question, as you'll see, it's similar to many others in this particular part of the district. Roof plan for you. Okay, so extension works were carried out to this property to provide an annex in the roof space, and the approved plans look like this. So the application before you seeks amendments to those approved plans. In essence, variation of condition 2, which deals with the approved plans, and variation of condition 4. Condition 4 of the original planning consent removed permitted development rights with regards to the insertion of windows into the north and south elevations of the roof, or planes of the roof. So, as constructed, the development now has a number of alterations to it. A door in the flank elevation, variation of condition 2, and a Velux roof light, variation of condition 4. In addition to which, internal alterations have been undertaken to the development to provide, instead of an ensuite serving bedroom 1 on the ground floor, we now have a staircase which has been moved from the centre of the building adjoining a bathroom. There are two issues before you tonight to consider as far as this application is concerned. One is the impact of those alterations in terms of the external appearance of the building. The other is the fact that essentially the first floor accommodation is now self-contained. Taking the first issue first, or the second issue first rather, the property lies within 400 metres of St Catherine's Hill, and as I'm sure members are aware, there is a restriction, a significant restriction, with regards to the creation of new dwellings within 400 metres of St Catherine's Hill. So technically, if we were to consider this application as it stands for 2 dwellings, then it would be something that we would resist as officers. However, as members will note from their agenda, we've been provided with a legal agreement which the legal services team have addressed and find satisfactory in terms of its wording and its intent, which essentially gives the assurance that the 2 units will be retained as 1. Properties currently share a garden area. That's not been divided in any way. They share a utility facility, the utility room at the bottom of the staircase there, and also they share parking facilities. So, as far as officers are concerned, this development can be secured as a single planning unit. In other words, there's just 1 dwelling here, no problem with the 400 metre rule. The condition imposed on the original planning consent was considered sufficient to secure the retention, but obviously the 106 adds that extra piece of string to the belt and braces. The door that's been inserted, bottom photograph, the property as it stands, top photograph, and members will see it resembles, or it is, a single unit of accommodation. It doesn't look like 2 units, it is 1. The consideration then is, have the external alterations affected the appearance of the building such that planning consent should be refused because it no longer looks like a dwelling similar to its neighbours? And you'll see from the report that officers feel that the 2 alterations don't significantly change the character of the property. other properties in the area have similar alterations and extensions, and on that basis we consider the proposals acceptable. We have recommended grant tonight, Chairman, and obviously it's for members to debate. Thank you.
Chairman, just one matter to update in relation to the conditions on the report. If I just take members to condition 3, condition it's in the recommendation, Chairman. So, thank you. Page 19. That condition is pulled over from the original permission, and what it does is refers to the proposed accommodation shall be used solely for residential purposes, incidental to the enjoyment of the main property. It would be better for it to say residential purposes ancillary to the enjoyment of the main property. The reason for that is there's an arguable distinction between an incidental use and an ancillary use. And an incidental use is normally used to refer to operations that might take place in an outbuilding, like a garage or storage and the like, whereas ancillary accommodation can include main dwelling uses like bedrooms, bathrooms, kitchens, etc. So for clarity, we wouldn't want to introduce that to a level of uncertainty for the use of the upper floor, and it would be preferable, Chairman, for it to refer to residential purposes ancillary to the enjoyment of the main property. And on that basis, as the case officer stated, we recommend the application for approval.
Thank you very much. Before I ask the speakers to give their views, can I ask the officer to confirm actually this is a retrospective application in that it is already built out in the form for which this application seeks permission?
Yes, Chairman, you're correct.
Thank you very much. Now we have against this Ms. Hurl, who is a neighbouring resident. You have a few seconds to introduce yourself, and then the light will come on and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Mary Hole. I'm a resident of Hillside Drive, and I am speaking for various residents of Hillside Drive who objected to the original planning application and to this application to amend said conditions 2 and 4. Thank you. Okay. So our reasons for opposing this application are twofold. One, because of the breach of the original planning conditions, and 2, it will set a precedent. The original planning permission, as you've heard, granted was for the creation of a single living annex on the first floor level with internal access only through the front door. The stipulation was made, and I quote from Joe Cleave's report, first floor accommodation could not be easily separated to form separate units in the future. And we're here today because the applicant is trying to legitimise a breach of the original planning by putting in extra windows and moving the stairs significantly to the side, adding an extra door and therefore creating what is a self-contained unit. And by the way, the applicants also failed to comply from the previous meeting with the county highways to provide a suitably surfaced driveway. The report actually here that we have Paras 2 and other places, you mentioned that the first floor can potentially be used as a self-contained annex. It is and has been occupied as a fully functioning self-contained unit since January. And we were told at the last meeting in July that because it's occupied by an applicant's family and daughter, that somehow that has mitigating circumstances to the planning. And they living as one family, but it is 2 very distinct units. My question is, given there is no internal access between these 2 flats, in what way is this property not 2 independently accessed and functioning units? The change has been made by the applicant, and I quote from your report again because it suits the owners and occupants. However, the applicant is a practising solicitor and as such is well aware of the terms and conditions of planning granted and the consequences of ignoring such, which she has chosen to do. At the last meeting on the 19th of July, members of this committee looked at the plans, were not happy and gave instructions to the applicant to come back with new plans, and I quote specifically, quoting internal integration of the two units. Again, this has not happened. There's been no complicity on this. And again, at the last meeting on the 11th hour, we were told that although the council was minded to refuse it, that because there was going to be a Section 106 agreement, that would change things and that it would be agreed. And we were assured by the solicitor that the applicant's solicitor, that it's actually difficult to overturn. However, I think an agreement is not necessarily watertight. He said it was difficult to overturn, but not impossible. And in your report here, paragraph 8.9, the officers state if the agreement provides adequate safeguards. So does it or doesn't it? I mean, is that clear? Does it or does it not? And also, I've looked on the UK government and the LGA website, and a person can apply to have a Section 106 after 5 years taken away. So it is not, and I want to know how the council are going, because I'm very worried about the ongoing precedents this will set. How are you going to make sure that happens? How will you police, for a better word, that? Because someone in 5 years, and if it happens here, if you allow this to happen, with respect, it will open. How can you stop other people doing the same? Thank you for your time. Thank you.
And we have Ms. Buckley. Who's going first? Buckley, you have again, you have a few minutes to introduce yourself and
Good evening. My name is Claire Buckley. I am the applicant in this matter. I would just like to say a few words. I filed a statutory declaration in August with the council to explain the personal side of this matter. I hope you have read it, together with my unilateral undertaking, that's the 106 agreement, and my solicitor's legal submissions. I would just like to reiterate the following points. I am a divorce solicitor. I have been doing family law for over 30 years. I have probably seen every possible reason for a marriage and relationship to fail. I deal with financial issues on divorce and disputes over children on a daily basis. I have also been married twice. I was very mindful of all these issues when considering having my grown-up daughter, Francesca, and her husband, Sean, live with me in my home. For these reasons, and these reasons alone, I knew it would be best for all of us if there was a degree of privacy. Francesca was newly married and wanting to start a family. Sean is a shy and very private person. I am sensitive to his need for peace, relaxation and independence, and have promised him that he does not need to say hello to me every night when he comes home from work. I want to be a mother-in-law who gives her son-in-law space and time to be himself, as well as support if he needs it. I don't want him to feel that he has to see me on a daily basis and hold a conversation with me, unless he wants to. I want him to feel that it is his own home too, and that he is not living in my pocket. In addition, I wanted to protect my own newish relationship with my partner Steve, who's here behind me, and afford him the same privacy from my family. When we had got together, neither of us envisaged sharing our living space with my offspring. Steve has been very supportive and tolerant of this project, helped by the suggestions for privacy which I made from the beginning with all concerned. This is the only reason that I accepted the advice of my brother and the building foreman that if we departed from the plans, then we could subsequently apply for retrospective permission. They took the view that as the reciting of the staircase was an internal change, no one would be bothered. This was backed up by our telephone calls to the planning department. We made 3 telephone calls. The person I spoke to, a female planning officer whose name I did not take, I didn't think I would need it, was very definite that planning did not dictate internal amendments. It seemed, therefore, that the original planning officer was wrong. The window and door were also seen as capable of being rectified by an application for a non-material amendment. This was supported by the council's own enforcement officer, who advised the same. He didn't see it as an issue. In all, I believed, rightly or wrongly, that these matters were not major and were certainly not unlawful or illegal in any way. With regard to the driveway, I shall continue to press my builder to finish the job, but if he doesn't do so very soon, then I'll instruct another builder to complete it. The hard surface of the drive does exist and it's being used, and we are complying with condition 4, which requires turning and parking to be accommodated on site for highway safety reasons. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Lionel Finn, and I'm a solicitor for the applicant, Ms. Claire Buckley. Tell me when you're ready for me to start. In support of this application, I would like to say that there is nothing unusual or questionable about a family wanting to accommodate members of that family in the same house and to have a degree of separation between them in order to retain an element of privacy, particularly when they are adult and have their own partners. This is fully explained by Claire Buckley in her statutory declaration. Neither is there anything unusual in an application being made for retrospective permission, particularly when the overall residential use is not being changed, but amendments are being sought in the physical layout of the premises to give effect to the situation I have described. As a starting point, the fears from objectors and council officers on the potential risk of two separate dwellings being created were fully understood and both addressed factually and legally. The applicant recognises and accepts the need for a condition on the planning consent, limiting user and occupation to the existing family, and to sent you in her statutory declaration detail of how that's arisen, and indeed explained it today. An enforceable unilateral undertaking has been submitted, and it's agreed to keep the dwelling within a single family and not to go outside this. And that agreement adds additional force to the council's enforcement powers. And yes, theoretically, it can be amended, but only by application to the council. So you have overall say in that matter. In the light of these safeguards, residents' objections about potential problems and enforceability are simply not sustainable. The same applies to Natural England, who for some reason say they do not feel able to comment on the unilateral undertaking which controls the whole situation. Their observations are only relevant if there are to be two separate dwelling units, which there are not. Numerous cases, planning appeals and High Court decisions are tabled in my legal submissions, which you have, and which reinforces the legality of what I am saying today, and with similar cases shows that the High Court have upheld arrangements such as we are proposing here. In all these circumstances, I invite the members of the committee to grant the application as lodged and as has been recommended by your planning officers. Thank you very much.
First of all, Chairman, it's a matter of interest because a few years ago I did use the services of Mr. Finn for a planning application against this council G1, but it's not going to affect my. I just thought that should be just noted. Then I have got questions, please. Firstly, on recommendation 3, the proposed accommodation solely for residential purposes, but on other occasions we have said it must be family use, and if it's going to be for family use, I think that should be inserted so that it will be for family use, and that has happened on several applications since I've been on this planning committee. So I think that would only be fair. And the other thing I wanted to know is, as it's being completed now, have it passed all the fire and building regulations? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. The building regulations is a matter for that part of the process. So building regulations need to be tackled separately to the planning process, Councillor. So the applicant would have a duty to make sure that the works that they've done comply with the building regs. In terms of family use, what the lawful use of the property is as a single dwelling house in Class C3. Our view is it would be unreasonable to have a family restriction placed on the occupation of the property because, in effect, it shouldn't be treated any differently from a house that you could buy anywhere and you could cohabit with someone who wasn't part of the family, just a friend, relative, lodger and the like. So from our point of view, the critical issue is whether it can be subdivided into two dwellings. And as you've heard, we're satisfied from the report that the legal agreement gives us that suitable cover, and we don't need to go further than that, Chairman, in order to protect the issue as it relates to the Heathland concern.
Thank you, Chairman, for that, and the officer for that reply. I don't agree with him because I know on other properties you have made it specifically that it must be family members. So I think that should be there.
Questions?
It is a question. It's an answer to the answer I got, Chairman.
Now I know I'm back. That it was a statement. It should be there, and there wasn't a question mark in it. So can I ask members to stick to questions and bring the debate in afterwards? Are there any further questions? So I have Councillor Neil.
Yeah, one of the speakers said there was no interlinking contact between the two units, but I was under the impression the staircase did link into the other unit.
That actually, Councillor Neil, is a question I was about to ask. We have here, as I read it, a door, the staircase which ascends from the, which is accessed there, and then can we look at where it comes out at the top of the stairs? So the staircase is there. Now, is there not a door in the hallway? On the upstairs, no, on the upstairs, it looks that it shows just over, it says kitchen diner, there is a door there, which would be accessed between the two properties. Or am I reading the plan wrongly?
Chairman, with all due respect, you're reading the plan wrongly.
Okay, that's fine.
No, you come up the stairs here, is my understanding. This hallway is a hallway within the first floor. And going back to the ground floor, I'll work out how the mouse works eventually. As you say, your access is here, and that takes you up the stairs. This rear utility door is shared between the two properties as it's the access to the garden, and the garden isn't subdivided or in any way. So no, there isn't in respect of Councillor's original point, there isn't a further internal connection, but you must be in the same building to get into the accommodation.
Can I push this? I'm sorry to be a pain, but I've read. Can we go back to the plan of the subordinate flat there? Now, I would assume that the subordinate flat consists of the sitting room, where the stairs come up from the ground floor. Yeah?
Correct.
The kitchen diner.
Correct.
And there's a door shown between the kitchen diner and the hall into which the other bedrooms open.
Yeah, I think the short answer is it's all a single floor accommodation. There just happens to be a door separating the sitting room, kitchen, diner from the bedrooms and access to the bedrooms and bathrooms. So it's a hallway which serves the upper floor accommodation.
Which are the limits of the proposed flat?
Well, I think the answer to your question is there isn't a limit because there isn't a division, and that's the point of the exercise in that it's a single planning unit, it's a single dwelling house. It just happens to have accommodation on 2 floors, which can be used independently, but can't become 2 separate dwelling houses. Does that help?
Yes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to read some of the law members to explain this situation, so do bear with me. It provides some context essentially as to what you have to determine this evening. Essentially, the main issue here is whether or not there's going to be 2 separate residential units. And the whole reason that is an issue is because of the policy within your local plan which protects the heathlands. That is to say, no further residential units within 400 metres of a protected heathland. Now that's from Natural England, obviously a statutory consultee. Your policies are there to protect European sites of importance. So it has to be read in that context. Is there two separate residential units here? Now, the Town and Country Planning Act controls development. Development is operational development or changes of use. But the Town and Country Planning Act also tells us what is not development. Okay, now crucially at section 55, which defines the meaning of development, it outlines what is not development. Section 55, subsection 2. The following operations or uses of land shall not be taken for the purposes of this act to involve development of the land, i.e. a negative. The carrying out for the maintenance, improvement or other alteration of any building of works which, 1, affect only the interior of the building. So interior works, doors, stud walls, staircases, is not development. You can imagine the planning system will be completely rammed full with endless applications. That's why, as a matter of law and policy, it is not development. So what you have to do is bear in mind, 1, the unilateral obligation given by way of deed by the applicant, and 2, the planning condition, which also controls the development. You have to turn your mind against that framework, against that enforcement control over the development you now have, whether or not you're satisfied that that just controls the one residential use here. That's essentially it. So to look at doors, staircases, stud walls, and so on with respect is pointedly the wrong question here. The right question to ask yourself is this now 2 residential units, or is it just one with very, very strict controls? 1 by condition number 3, and 2 by the unilateral given by way of deed. Now, in terms of the deed, any breach of a planning obligation is enforceable. I've mentioned this before in the last time this came to you with respect, councillors. That's enforceable by way of injunction. An injunction granted by the High Court, which, if anyone wants to act as a contemnor, is a contempt of court and is imprisonable. That's the first point in terms of the unilateral obligation given here. The second point is the condition, which controls singular residential use. Now, under the Act, there is a tool within the planning enforcement team's armoury or toolkit, which is called a breach of condition notice. So you have 1, the injunction route, which the council as local planning authority could pursue, and 2, the breach of condition route by way of breach of condition notice. And that's under section 187A of the Town and Country Planning Act. That's simply a question of us serving a notice. It is not appealable. The applicant here cannot appeal to the planning inspector against one of those notices. If it was an enforcement notice, yes. You can appeal to the planning inspector for an enforcement notice. But because this is a condition, it's a quicker, swifter process. The notice is served, the notice has to be complied with, and if it's not, criminal sanctions follow. Again, in the Magistrates' Court or the Crown Court. And possibly also Proceeds of Crime Act provisions. Okay, so you can enforce for proceeds of crime, and that's where unscrupulous landlords divide big Georgian houses into 3 or 4 or 5, 6 separate units, take rents unlawfully and make proceeds of crime, and there are cases of that too. So you have that framework. 1, the unilateral obligation by way of deed, and 2, the condition here. So with respect to questions about what's happening inside, as I read to you, is not development within section 55(2)(a). It is, however, relevant as to whether or not you feel there are 2 separate planning units. But in answering that question, you have to bear in mind that context of the 2 enforcement regimes that this is now controlled by. So I hope that helps, members, rather than going off and talking about internal works without understanding the full context here. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? As there are no further... Councillor Hallam?
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to understand in my mind how we're going to monitor. Is it something that is revisited after a period of time, or how does that happen?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, through you. This is always a problem with residential uses that are perhaps within four walls, where individuals, obviously within those four walls, it relies upon neighbours, it relies upon visits, it relies upon people essentially reporting to the enforcement team, unfortunately. That is one of the difficulties of the planning system, where, for example, farmers may live in outdoor barns, and then after a period of time, that barn becomes a house because it becomes immune from enforcement due to passage of time. It is one of the difficulties of enforcement. But rest assured, we have a very proactive enforcement team which can deal with complaints very, very swiftly. I think that's the only salvation and peace of mind I can probably give you, Councillor.
Thank you.
If the property is sold, do the conditions carry on regardless?
Again, through you, Chair. That's a good question, Councillor. The first simple answer is the deed under Section 106 binds successors in title. So under the Act, Section 106 makes clear that a planning obligation has to be by way of deed. That means it's registrable as a land charge. So any purchaser will then see that particular covenant or planning obligation when they take purchase of that site, because it is registered as a land charge. So it will follow and flow with the land. The planning permission itself is also a public document, so the world at large can see what the restrictions are in terms of that particular residential use. Okay, thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a very interesting application, and I have listened to the speakers for and against it. I've listened carefully to the advice that has come from our legal officers, and I conclude as follows: that, Chairman, notwithstanding the configuration of the door and the issue of the door, I'm content that the matter is mitigated by the inclusion of the 106 and the enforceable unilateral declaration, which is a lawful situation. And I'm content that if this matter went to appeal, then we would not be able to defend it successfully, which may go against the feelings of some of our members, but I believe that to be the fact. Therefore, it is my understanding that with the unilateral declaration, the enforceable unilateral declaration of the 106 agreement, the conditions that have been set down, which are in the paper this evening, with the amendment which has been suggested, which goes from ancillary to incidental to ancillary. Thank you, that this application should be approved, and I am happy to propose as set out with that minor drafting amendment. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. That is a proposal for approval as set out with the amendments. Is that seconded? That is seconded. Councillor Neal, is there any further debate? Councillor Mrs Jones.
I can see, Mr. Chairman, that it looks as if we have no real choice, but I have to say that I dislike retrospective applications because that shows to me a lack of concern for the law. So to say, well, we've done it, now can we have permission? I'm not sure about this emphasis that we keep getting, that they will have the same garden, they will have the same parking space, you know, so that makes it one unit. In my ward, there are flats which have shared gardens, shared parking spaces, and they're definitely two separate units. So you can't automatically say one makes it justifiable as one unit when there are instances where you've got two. So if I do support this, Mr. Chairman, it is with the greatest reluctance, as long as I'm sure that the legal team are absolutely sure this is as cast iron as it can be. Although I would say that when we talk about we've got a very good enforcement section, etc., we aren't actually going to be here very long. So we'll have to hope our successor authority has an equally determined enforcement system. So it seems as if we haven't really got an alternative, but I don't like it.
I shall be positively abstaining on this issue, and I'd like to give the committee some indications of why I feel I cannot support it, but I cannot vote against it. The concern that I had, and why I was asking about the door, was that there is permeability between the two units, or the two possible potential units. There was a concern that was raised in the speaker, when the applicant, when she said that the son-in-law would not have to come and say good evening to her when he came home, which sounds to me as he would have his own entrance and privacy, which to me sounds like almost like a separate unit. But the door's there and there is a permeability. Thinking in terms of another possible usage for this as a granny flat, then granny would obviously want to move in and come back and withdraw when it was appropriate, and it is the fact that there is this makes it more likely. However, I am concerned, as Councillor Mrs. Jones is, I don't like retrospective applications. There is a planning law, there is planning policy, and while it is an applicant, a landowner's right to do with his property as he wishes, unless we can show that there is harm and they are not consistent with the planning policy framework, then quite rightly the bias in the planning system is towards the landowner, and that's fine. But I do not like when people say, ah yes, I'm going to do it, and then I'll ask for planning permission afterwards. But there is, and I too have seen cases where we have seen an application for ancillary use, and over the years, 3 or 4 years down the line, there's been an application to amend the restrictions and come back. I know we've been assured that this is a cast iron, copper bottomed legal agreement, and I accept the goodwill of the applicant in putting this forward to try and make sure that this is that this will continue as an ancillary use. I am, however, as I've said, uneasy, so while I will not oppose this, I am unable to support it. Is there any further debate? So there's no further debate. It has been proposed and seconded for approval as set out. All those in favour, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All those against?
I'm against it, Mr. Chairman, because the officer wouldn't put in family use, which he's done on other properties, so it's not fair.
Thank you. That 2 against, and my own abstention, please. Thank you very much. That is approved. If members of the public who came for this application now wish to leave, that's perfectly permissible. You'll miss a highly informative debate on the second application, but that's right, ladies and gentlemen, we now move on to application 4B, which is Mr. Hodges. Miss Bowditch.
Me again. Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of housekeeping notes on this application as well. We would like it if members would allow us to change the description attached to the application. To change of use of the unit from Class A1 to a mixed Class A1/A3 use coffee shop at ground floor only. And it's that's changed. Previously we were looking at potentially the whole unit changing, I think, from the description. So that is something we'd appreciate members allowing us to do. And the other little bit of housekeeping is we've again received an additional objection, which members will be not surprised to read because it's written down. Doesn't raise any new issues in terms of the objections already noted in the agenda papers. So, 42 High Street. Members will be familiar with this property, I'm sure. Previously used as a shoe retailer. It's a Grade 2 listed building, a prominent corner position, the junction of the High Street and Milham Street. And the application before you tonight seeks consent to change the use of the property from A1 to a mixed A1/A3 use. And I'll briefly explain why a coffee shop is considered to be partially A1. The applicants have provided significant case law such that we're convinced that they are actually correct in what they're giving us, to the effect that at least 40% of most coffee shops fall within an A1 retail use. So I'm sure members are aware A3 use relates to the sale of hot food for consumption on or off the premises, whereas Class A1 use permits the sale of cold food for consumption off the premises. The issue here is that a lot of coffee shops will sell cold food in the form of sandwiches or perhaps coffee or other goods that are taken away from the premises. They don't actually form part of the hot food side of things. So on that basis, we're satisfied that this would be a mixed use. Fundamental to the consideration of the application are the policies pertaining to the High Street and the retention of the primary retention of retail units within the primary shopping core. I'm sure members are aware, because again the report refers to it. Policy CH6 of the core strategy requires that at least I'll start that sentence again. Policy CH6 of the core strategy requires that no more than 30% of retail frontages are used for non-retail purposes in the primary shopping core. The issue here is that recent changes to the National Planning Policy framework have encouraged greater flexibility in terms of town centre users and the way that local planning authorities approach them. So we have a balance to strike. We're looking at the viability and vitality of the town centre, the fact that this unit has been vacant for a number of months, that the use proposed includes an element of A1 retail use, and that it is a Grade 2 listed building. The longer it stays in a state of vacancy, the greater is the state of disrepair. So we have a balance to strike. Do we allow the balance to be tipped in terms of the town centre and the number of coffee shop uses or the number of non-retail uses, and have a vacant shop unit, because this one has been marketed extensively with no takers? Or do we actually allow a use that has, again, that element of A1, which would put the building back into reasonable use? And given prospective changes to the MPPF, who knows what could happen? It may be that in the future use classes don't necessarily apply and the unit could go back to full retail or to something else in the future. I don't have a crystal ball, I can't predict. So on the basis that this application would put the unit back into viable use, would enhance footfall in this part of the town centre, and would actually remove a vacant unit from this high street frontage, your officers have recommended approval. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Bowditch. Are there any questions? We now have speakers. We have Mr. Ismail. Would like to come to the table, please? And again, you'll have a few seconds to introduce yourself before the green light comes on.
Good evening, everyone. As you can see, I'm finished my work coming here. I work 7 days a week for the last 6 years. I've been owner and director of Baggy Coffee House. It's opposite Shoe Zone previously. And basically, can I start? Okay, basically, let's talk about the vibrancy to the town centre. I don't think there is vibrancy at all. There is 28 coffee shops who sell the same coffee and the same food. So what is the vibrancy here? I'm not sure what it is. You have a policy of guidelines of 30% of retail, non-retail outlet, but you exceeded this already 40%. Which is unfair for other retailer who are, in the last few years, we've seen so many has been closed already, independent business shop. Like I can count 5 or 6 of them. Okay, and I get into the employee bubble. Well, I don't know how they're going to employ 8 people. That's will if the new outlet taking 2% from every other coffee shop customers, then I'm not going to employ other people. I'm going to get rid of other people, and therefore you're not gaining any employment in these positions. And as recommended by here is an email from Simon, who's in the planning committee. He said that there's so much evidence to show here no one the footfall in the high street has been decreased due to the element of only coffee shops and hairdresser in the high street. There is no vibrancy at all, and the reason for this is a high rate, an expensive high rate in the whole county to find in Christchurch High Street, and this is unfair for small businesses who want to run. The company, with respect to there is 7 other shops that are for sale. They can be used. But what's different with this one? It has to be another food outlet. But what can you go and have one of these outlets already made, already used? That there is no objection against that. I have no. There's an email dated here from 29th of July that recommended that this is a great places to be used as a retailer and a non-food outlet from Simon to Melanie Smith. Also, the planning application is submitted. The advertising is taken off. The notice been taken off for very long, and this was making people who wanted to know what it is, there is no visible to the public what the planning is for. And this is also is a legal requirement that to bring, when you put it notes in there, to leave it until the application is being closed. And in many occasions, I have spoken to the officer involved, and they give me wrong information against this.
Mr. Ismail, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I have to say, you're getting into matters of process, which, although important, we can't take into account here. If you have any concerns with the way the application has been handled, your correct recourse is to speak to either to your town centre councillor, Councillor Hall or Councillor Grace, to the Vice Chairman or to myself, if you think that significant errors have been made in the way that the application has been handled and the information presented to the public. I have to ask you to stick to the concerns, as I said right at the beginning, material planning considerations. How the application was handled is a matter for concern to myself, but it isn't a matter for concern for the committee. So if you could just carry on, but stick to the material planning considerations, please.
I remain concerned that that would be introduced another food and drink in use from in the high street outlet, and then the pedestrian and the traffic will create more traffic, more delivery vehicle in high street, and will be dangerous for a population of 80% of customers. Okay. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you. We have Mr. Jones, my namesake, agent for the applicant. Again, a few moments to introduce yourself and then we'll start the clock running.
Okay. Hello, my name is Elliot Jones. I'm the planning consultant for Coffee Number 1. Coffee Number 1 supports the officer's recommendation to approve the proposed change of use of 42 High Street from Class A1 to a mixed Class A1, A3 use. The proposed use will increase the vitality and vibrancy of the town centre. This will be through the reuse of a prominent listed building that has been vacant for over a year, an increase in activity in the centre due to the flow of people to the store, and improved dwell times of visitors to the town centre. However, we note the local plan position concerning the level of retail uses within Christchurch Town Centre. This is set out in policy CH6, which states that no more than 30 units should be in non-retail use in the primary shopping frontage. That said, the proposal will lead only to a slight increase above the threshold, whilst all other criteria within the policy can be met. As recognised in the officer's report, planning is a matter of balance, and there is strong policy support for the proposal elsewhere in the plan, such as in policies CH1 and CH2. In addition, guidance in the NPPF now requires a more flexible approach to be adopted. This is in order to address the challenges currently faced in retail locations. Therefore, to rigidly apply a threshold limit would seem not to accurately reflect current market conditions. I can also confirm that the proposed redevelopment, although not considered as part of this application, will be sympathetic to the listed building. Coffee Number 1 has a long-standing track record of sensitively restoring listed buildings. Their approach is to retain and emphasise features and note. It will be an improvement on the current shop front, and thus in compliance with policies H1 and BE4 of the local plan, as well as the objectives of the wider conservation area and national guidance. The proposal will thus have a positive impact on retail function, character, vitality and viability of Christchurch Town Centre. It will create new jobs, help attract investment and bring greater footfall. Notwithstanding this, we are aware that the proposal has been the subject of objections and a petition. These relate to points such as there being too many coffee shops in the centre, the site should be retained for retail, and there would be an adverse impact on existing businesses. Amenity and highway concerns were also raised. These points are clearly addressed in the officer's report, which states that competition is not a planning consideration. Whilst an extensive marketing exercise has been undertaken and no retailers were interested in this site, whilst none of the available A3 units were of sufficient size to meet Coffee Number 1's requirements. I'd also note the operation of the store will be very similar to a shop and will not give rise to adverse amenity or highway impacts. In summary, we support the recommendation to grant planning permission, and I can also confirm that Coffee Number 1 would be happy to accept the conditions proposed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions, please? Are there any questions from members? Councillor Neal.
So our policy CH6 still exists?
Mr. Hodges, please.
Bear with me 2 seconds. Can I just check the report, the Chairman? Right, apologies for that. I was just finding it in the report, Chairman. Yes, if it's listed in the report, it'll be a saved policy. So, sorry, it's not a saved policy. It's a current policy from the core strategy. So, yes, it is. It is still a part of the development plan, still part of our local plan.
And can I ask another? Sorry. Several numbers have been mentioned tonight about percentages of what coffee shops we've got currently. Is there any clarification? Can you confirm one way or another, or not?
Chairman, if I take you to what's listed in the report, a survey has been undertaken by ourselves, which is in the comments from your planning policy officer, so that's on page 27. So if you look on the CBC planning policy comments, you'll see the referral there to a 2017 land use survey, so back in a year ago in August 2017, suggests a proportion of non-retail uses already exceeds 30%, nearly 40% in the town centre. So that's the evidence that we have today, Chairman.
I'd just like to pass comment. I didn't think 40% was a slight increase. I think it's about 10%.
Very much, Mr. Chairman. There's just one on policy ENV3, potential of pollution. Obviously, there is going to be some. What have you put in to make sure that we do get those fumes or whatever comes out done in a correct way? Because often in some of the shops that have had restaurants, fumes do cause a lot of problems for neighbours.
Chairman, for this use as a coffee shop, the information submitted with the application indicates they don't cook within the unit. So they prepare sandwiches, they might heat up panini of the like, but they're not deep fat frying, they're not cooking, they're not frying, doing any of those sorts of actions. So the use would require not much more than installation of the coffee machine, some refrigeration unit. So we're not expecting, it's not a full-scale restaurant, it's not a Pizza Express, it shouldn't need those facilities. If they do need those facilities, they would need listed building consent and planning permission, and we would have control over those at a later date in a separate application, Chairman.
Thank you for that. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's very interesting, this one, and I still can't understand why the recommendation is to grant, because it is way over the 30%. When it used to be 20%, it crept up to 25%, and then for the new core strategy, we had to make it 30%. Now we're talking over 40% in the town centre, and a lot of the businesses are struggling. Now, the fact that it's been empty for a period of time, there's other property in the town centre that's been empty far longer than this shop. So why make an exception of this shop? There's others that could apply saying the same thing. It's been empty for so long. It's not a reason to grant planning, in my opinion. I think that we've got a lot of properties that are even now on the market because they can't make it pay. You're talking about employment. They can't employ 8 people. It put another 8 out from other businesses out of work. So we're not going to gain any employment. So I don't see why that's even on the report, because it won't work out. And I think really this would be very detrimental to the vibrancy and vitality of the town centre. It's not a shop that we want to have in the town centre, because we've got plenty already, and I think this would be very detrimental. So I'd like to propose that this is refused on other planning grounds that we have.
Councillor Hall, I'm going to have to ask you, and this isn't me being awkward, it's now a requirement, to specify the grounds for the planning policies on which you would seek that this be refused.
Oh, sorry. Policy CH6, policy HE1, BE4, ENV3. I still don't think that's and also because it's against the core strategy on the percentage of retail. And the percentage of retail, Mr. Chairman, is very important to the town centre and its viability and vibrancy. So I think it would be the correct thing to do is to refuse this. Thank you.
Thank you. That is a proposal for refusal on, and it is supported by reference to appropriate policies. Is that seconded? Councillor Grace?
Through you, Chairman, I'd like to second Councillor Hall and with the recommendations that he has also put in. My concern, I do understand that it looks empty and we need to actually fill these shops in Christchurch, but I am concerned about all the people that have coffee shops and businesses at present. There are others up for sale at the moment, so I will support Councillor Hall on the second thing. Thank you.
Councillor Neal?
I support the same way, because I've heard there's a number of private coffee shops that are actually up for sale because they're not making any money at the moment, and that is going to add to the problem of unemployment. And I think the 8 would not necessarily follow through. We would be losing more by the half a dozen shops that might end up having to close because they're coffee shops already.
Thank you. Is there any further debate? Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I'm not convinced at the moment that I can support the proposal to refuse, because it is my understanding, and I may be wrong, that competition between units is not a planning concern. So, whether we like that or not, that is the fact. The only issue I think that is relevant is the percentage that is against nearly 40%, and the wording is quite interesting. If I can find it, 40% in the core, but not 40% in the. I'm looking for some assistance from the officers here.
Chairman, yes,
including the surrounding area.
Yes. If it just helps, it's paragraph 8.02. No, hang on. Yes, paragraph 8.02 on page 28. So the proportion of non-retail and private furniture is margin excess of 35%, and this is not disputed by the applicant. So just to clarify that particular point for you, Chairman. Yeah.
So if you take away the competition element that's been alluded to already, which includes the number of shops that may or may not be up for sale because they're not making any profit, is not relevant to us. If you take away the business rates, and if you take away the level of rent, they are not planning matters. So the planning matters are set out by the officers, and I don't believe that we could defend this on appeal. So it's not, Mr. Chairman, it's not what we want to see or what we would like to see, but it is what the law allows us to decide, and we have to, whether we like it or not, work within the parameters of the law. Also, we need to, as has already been stated, work within the emerging changes to the NPPF, and I think they will add extra weight to the applicant's proposal. Again, whether we like it or not, that is the law. So I am not going to be able to support the proposal to refuse, although it's not what I want to see, but that's the law. Thank you.
I was really getting to the vitality of the town, the viability of the town, not the employment, which isn't a planning constraint.
Members, this is an extremely difficult application. We cannot say here there are too many coffee shops. We are not a planned economy, we are a market economy. And therefore, if a new coffee shop moves in, and if there is only a market for for the sake of argument, 10 coffee shops and an 11th comes in, then one of the others will drop out. That's not a planning matter, that's the way the market works. However, I am concerned about the arguments about vitality and retail. There is a percentage, we are saying, and there's one rather odd figure here which says that it's now 35%, which is a marginal increase on 30%. Well, that's not a marginal increase. That's quite a sizable increase. And that is my concern. We read in here, that in the report, that people want a variety of shops to come into Christchurch. I don't think shoppers will be attracted to a town centre that is one coffee shop after another. You've got to have very few people will drive into Christchurch specifically to have a cup of coffee at one particular shop or any shop. You might take a cup of coffee incidentally to your perusal or your investigation of other retail units, but you're not going to make a special trip to Christchurch for a cup of coffee. Now, the main considerations in this involvement are the principle of development, fine. The principle of development, and it is admitted in 802, the principle, the non-A1 part of the proposed mixed use would be contrary to policies KS7 and CH6. Bang. Second one, the impact on the vitality and viability of the town centre. The town centre will be viable if people come into the town centre. They have got to have a reason for coming into the town centre. Now, somewhere in here, again, it says that people would probably like to come into Christchurch town centre to look at clothes shops. That people might want to come into town centre to look at a bookshop. Now, it is disappointing that we've lost a shoe shop, which was a retail outlet, and people would come in to buy shoes. But you do get shoes now on Meteor Retail Park and on other places, and again. But how far is this going to go? Again, policy CH1 seeks the expansion of evening economy uses such as restaurant, cafes, pubs will be encouraged, especially along Church Street. So you have the evening economy will enhance the vitality of the centre, making it a more vibrant place throughout the day. Well, apart from the query on the English there, how can being a more vibrant centre in another coffee shop in the daytime make it more viable in the evening? Yes, the coffee shop may well be open in the evening, but is it enhancing, as I've said before, the vitality? Now, again, yes, it's not. Another point here is the character and appearance of the town centre. I agree, a dead shop does not do much good for the town centre. Yet there are plenty of dead shops in Dorchester, for example. I came past a shop which had been a mini market, but it's been disguised, the emptiness of it's disguised by illustrations stuck in the window. So you don't have to have an empty shop window. I have to say, this has to be a very balanced decision. I am aware, and I take into account all the comments set out in 806 that things are moving forward. I note the applicants are saying they will respect, and I congratulate them on it, they will respect the heritage assets. That is a good thing, and that's to be commended. But again, continued strict adherence to the 30% restriction is inflexible and is considered it could have a detrimental effect on the vitality of the town centre. But then it moves on to the next one. Taking a case-by-case approach to considering the impact of proposals is considered to offer a more flexible and positive approach. Well, we're looking at a case-by-case. Is the addition, in this case, of one more coffee shop going to enhance the vitality of the town centre? I have to say, I am not convinced, and I'm inclined to support the proposition. Is there any further debate?
Just one, if I may.
Councillor Holmes.
Could I just add to my reason for refusal, KS7? I don't think I mentioned that the first time. In case I didn't, could I add that?
Thank you. Would the officer like to come back before we go to the vote?
Yes, Chairman. You'll see in the report we set out that there's a breach of that policy. You'll see throughout the report that we've tried to balance that in terms of the bigger picture. And for us as officers, the bigger picture is it preferable to have a vacant unit with a hope that it may come back into use for retail, or is it better to have a heritage asset in use with a use that's complementary to the town centre, provides employment, generates income, and generates vitality and viability for the town centre? That's where we're coming from. We see there are positive benefits from taking a more flexible approach. I think the other, before a decision is made, the other point that we would like to just emphasise is the greater degree of flexibility put forward in the government's recent changes to their own guidance, and how they see town centres as moving forward into a modern era with a very flexible approach between these use classes, and the regulation that we currently have is likely to be taken away. Chairman, just for the committee's benefit, this we appreciate maybe something that escaped most people's notice from last month's budget, but listed in there, the government is mooting further changes to the existing use class orders to revive town centres. The consultation document says, with the rise of internet shopping and a change in how people use the high street, it's time to consider how the operation of the use classes order can really support further flexibility. It asks for a view on whether the A1 use class could be simplified to ensure that it accommodates new and future business models and modern shopping preferences. The Ministry also says there is scope for a new use class that provides a mix of uses within Class A1, A2 and A3 uses, beyond that which is considered to be ancillary, which would support the diversification of high street businesses. The measure would mean that movement between these uses, so between a shop, between a bank, financial services and between a cafe, would be no longer development, and they're no longer a matter for the planning system to consider. So our experience of the consultations that we've had come forward from central government in recent years is they consult with us and in effect they plough on when they think it's a good idea and adopt those reasons. So we think it's likely in the future that in actual fact these distinctions between shops, cafes, financial services may actually be swept away, and we actually wouldn't have that control in the future. So we may find that if the application is refused, even if we win an appeal, we could find that it simply becomes not development to change between that use in the future. So we do want to just emphasise that point that the government is very much heading towards a more flexible approach. And for us, we've attached great weight to the reuse of the heritage asset for what we consider to be a sympathetic use, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hodges. I would just direct members' attention to minute 134, which you'll find on page 7, where we discussed an application, and I'm sure members will remember this, for for development in the Green Belt. And one argument put forward in support of this was that it was likely that that particular bit of land would not be green belt. And we were advised, quite rightly I believe, that that was what might happen in the future. We have to judge on what the case is now. And while indeed this might be an emerging matter, we deal with a set of policies that we have now. And it may well be that the government in 3, 4, 5, 6 months' time will change its approach. It may also be that in 5, 6, 7 months' time, this government may not be the government, and we might have another government that might have a totally different view of matters. We don't know. What we do know is that, in my humble opinion, we have sound grounds for refusing this application. Councillor Neal, and then we must move to the vote.
I want to congratulate you on everything I was going to say.
Councillor James.
Thank you, Chairman. It was brought to my attention that that viability and what's the phrase? Vitality and viability are indeed planning matters, and we look at the application site, and I would suggest that leaving that site empty would not enhance the vitality or viability of the town centre. However, the issue of competitiveness and market forces and all of the other issues that we've spoken about this evening are really predicated on things like rent and business rates. And we know that the government has come up with a scheme to support small businesses by lowering the business rates for smaller units. But we also know that we may know that business rates are dependent upon the rent. And it is the rent that causes the problem in the high street. It's not the council causing the problem in the high street. It's the landowners that own the properties. And we have no control over that whatsoever. So if you want to increase the vitality and viability, then the government is doing its bit by supporting the small business community. We can't influence that, and we can't influence the rent, as far as I'm aware. So the question really is, if that unit becomes a viable unit, or if it's left there as an empty unit, what is the benefit to the town centre? And I would suggest that it's better to have from the planning aspect that unit being utilised rather than left empty. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jameson, and I think we must now go to the vote. We have given this a very thorough airing, and I congratulate members on the quality of the debate that we've had. It is proposed and seconded for refusal as set out.
Chairman, I'm very sorry to interrupt. Can I just be clear that it's a single reason for refusal in relation to the breach of policy CH6 as increasing the non-retail proportion in the prime retail frontage area? I just need to bottom that out as being the reason for refusal, so we can get a sensible form of wording into a decision notice, bearing in mind the decision notice is a legal decision of the authority. So
I think Councillor Hall also wished, as is in the report, policy SK7 to be referenced.
yes, Chair. I've got the additional policies, but for the purposes of the record, I want to be clear that it's a single reason for refusal, and the harm is the breach of that policy, increasing the non-retail proportion in the primary retail frontage.
May I thank the officer for that, and I take that on board, and that's, I think, would be sensible to do, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. It has been proposed and seconded that this application be refused for the reasons that we've heard stated. All those in favour, please show, and I shall. That is refused. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. That concludes the business for this evening, and we will see you again in December. I did point out that, of course, we have training before everybody shoots off very late before the Christmas break. What's the date again, Daniel? On the 13th of December, and according to long-standing tradition within this